He framed me for his crime and watched me lose everything. Now he's dying, and I'm his only match. I need to start this by saying something my therapist told me last year. Closure doesn't always look like an apology. Sometimes it looks like a phone call you don't answer. My name's Daniel, I'm 34. And 6 years ago, my little brother destroyed my life so completely that I had to leave the state to build a new one. 2 weeks ago, his wife called me crying, asking if I'd save his life. I want to tell you the whole thing from the beginning, because I don't think you'll believe how far my family went to protect him. And I don't think you'll believe what I found out 3 days before I was supposed to check into a hospital and hand him one of my kidneys. My dad built a regional trucking and logistics company from a single flatbed truck in 1989. By the time I was in college, Whitcomb Freight Solutions had 400 employees and contracts with half the manufacturers in Ohio. Dad always said the company was going to be ours, mine and my brother Ryan's, and for a long time I actually believed that meant equally. Ryan is 2 years younger than me. Where I was quiet and good with numbers, Ryan was the kid who could walk into a room and have everyone laughing in 10 minutes. My parents adored him for it. I don't say that with bitterness. I adored him for it too when we were kids. He was my little brother. I used to let him win at basketball in the driveway just to see him grin. After college, I went into the company as a financial analyst, working my way toward controller. Ryan came in 2 years later as VP of Business Development, a title Dad basically built around him. I didn't resent it at the time. I told myself, I'm good with the books, he's good with people, we balance each other out. What I didn't know was that Ryan had a gambling problem he'd been hiding since business school. And by the time I found out, it was already too late, because he'd used it to bury me. It started small. Discrepancies in a logistics vendor account, maybe $11,000 that I found during a routine audit. I flagged it to our CFO, expecting a clerical fix. Instead, over the next 4 months, more discrepancies surfaced, always in accounts I had partial oversight on, always routed through a shell vendor called Ashcroft Logistics Partners. Total, just under $400,000. I remember sitting in the conference room while our outside auditor pulled up a wire authorization with my employee login credentials on it. I remember saying, I didn't send that. I wasn't even in the building that day. Nobody in that room believed me because 2 weeks earlier, my own brother had sat across from our father and said, quote, I've been noticing some weird stuff with Danny's spending. I didn't want to say anything, but I think you should look into it. Ryan had set the trap and then loaded the gun for someone else to pull the trigger. The company didn't press criminal charges, my dad's one mercy, but I was fired the same day, escorted out by security in front of people I'd worked with for 6 years. My name went out in a company memo, terminated for cause financial misconduct. My fiancée at the time, Melissa, found out through a mutual coworker before I even got home to tell her myself. She left 4 months later. My credit was frozen for a civil suit the company threatened but never filed. I couldn't get hired anywhere in finance in the entire Midwest, because any reference check led straight back to financial misconduct. My mother cried on the phone and told me she loved me, but that I needed to take responsibility so we can heal as a family. My father didn't speak to me for over a year. Ryan sent one text message during all of this. It said, "Hope you get back on your feet, man." I stared at that text for probably 20 minutes. I moved to Austin with $4,000, no job, and a name I couldn't use in my own industry. I rebuilt from scratch under a slightly different professional name, doing bookkeeping for small businesses, then eventually building my own accounting practice from nothing. It took 5 years to feel like a person again. 2 weeks ago, a number I didn't recognize called me 3 times in one afternoon. I almost didn't pick up the 4th time. It was Claire, Ryan's wife. I'd met her exactly twice, both times at Christmas before everything fell apart. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. "Daniel, it's Ryan. He's sick." He's really sick. Turns out Ryan had been diagnosed 18 months earlier with a genetic kidney condition, polycystic kidney disease, that had been quietly destroying his kidney function. The entire time he was busy destroying my career. He'd been on dialysis for 4 months. He was now in end-stage renal failure. He needed a transplant and fast, or he wasn't going to make it more than another year or two on dialysis. Here's the detail that still makes my hands shake a little when I think about it. Because it's genetic and hereditary, siblings are often the best possible match. Better than a spouse. Better than most strangers on a registry. Claire told me, voice shaking, that Ryan was a match candidate with me specifically, closer blood compatibility than either of our parents. My mother called an hour later. Then my father, who hadn't spoken to me directly in 6 years, called for the first time since my termination. He said, and I quote, "Whatever happened before, Daniel, this is your brother's life. Family is family." I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot for 45 minutes after that call, just staring at the steering wheel. Over the next 10 days, it escalated in a way that honestly felt engineered. My mother sent me photos of Ryan in a hospital gown, visibly thinner, hooked up to a dialysis line. My sister Amanda, who'd mostly stayed neutral through the years, started texting me daily. "He's asking for you. He cries every time your name comes up. Please just come see him, even if you don't decide anything yet." I want to be honest with you, it worked on me at first. I'm not a monster. I flew back to Ohio 8 days after that first call, mostly to see for myself. Mostly because some small, stupid, hopeful part of me wondered if being needed like this might finally bring us back together as a family. I sat in his hospital room. He looked terrible, gray skin, hollow cheeks, and arm bruised from IV lines. And when he saw me, he started crying and he said, "I'm so sorry, Danny. I've wanted to call you for years. I was a coward." For one afternoon, I let myself believe that was the whole truth. Then my mother pulled me into the hallway and said something that changed everything. She said, "The transplant team wants to move fast. We're hoping to schedule the donor evaluation by next week. Not can we talk about it. Not will you consider it. Scheduled." Like it was already decided. Like my body was already claimed. That's when I started asking harder questions. And that's when Claire, of all people, accidentally handed me the truth. Claire and I ended up alone in the hospital cafeteria while Ryan was getting a dialysis session. She was exhausted, raw, the kind of tired where people stop filtering themselves. She started talking about how hard the last 6 years had been on their marriage, how Ryan's gambling debt had almost bankrupted them twice, how she'd found out about a betting app on his phone, the same month he'd testified against me at the company review. I went very still. "Wait," I said. "What review?" She froze, realizing what she'd said, but it was already out. She told me reluctantly, guiltily, that Ryan had come home the week before I was fired and told her, drunk, that he'd handled the Ashcroft thing and that Danny's going to take the fall. "But it's fine, he'll land somewhere." She said she didn't understand the full context at the time. That Ryan told her later it was just office politics, and she'd chosen, her word, not to think about it too hard. Because they needed his income, and she didn't want to blow up their marriage over what she assumed was just some workplace conflict. I asked her to write down what she remembered, exactly as she remembered it with the date. She did, shaking hands, but she did it. That night I called an old friend from the company, Priya, who'd worked in it and had quietly kept in touch with me over the years out of guilt for how I was treated. I asked her one question. Was there any way to check old login timestamps from 6 years ago? She told me the company had switched systems since then, but backups from the old server had been archived for legal retention, required by state financial regulations, and she still had access as part of an ongoing systems migration project. 3 days later, she sent me an old access log. It showed the wire authorization on the Ashcroft account being submitted from an IP address inside the building at 7:40 p.m. on a night I could prove, through an old dentist appointment text still saved on my phone, that I was 40 minutes away getting a root canal. The login used my credentials, but the physical badge swipe logs, which Priya also found, showed my badge hadn't scanned into the building that entire day. Someone else's badge had scanned in at 7:15 p.m. and out at 8:10 p.m. Ryan's badge, I didn't go in swinging. I went back to the hospital 2 days later with copies of everything. Claire's written statement, the badge logs, the dental appointment records, the archived IP data, sitting in a folder in my bag. And I asked to speak to Ryan alone. I sat down next to his bed. I asked him one question. Did you set me up on the Ashcroft account? He said no. He said it fast, the way people say things they've rehearsed for years. I put the folder on his blanket. I didn't even open it. I just said, your badge scanned in at 7:15 that night. Mine didn't scan in at all. I have the dentist appointment. I have Claire's statement about what you said to her that week. I watched something in his face collapse. Not fear exactly, more like relief, the specific relief of a lie finally being too heavy to hold up anymore. He admitted it. Right there, machines beeping around him. He'd been $30,000 deep in sports betting debt, panicking, and he'd routed money through Ashcroft over 4 months. Using my login on nights, I wasn't in the building because he still had my old system password from a shared project years earlier. When our CFO started asking questions, Ryan went to our father first and planted the idea that it might be me, knowing Dad would trust his instincts on family loyalty over anything else. He said, crying, I never thought it would go as far as it did. I thought you'd get a warning, not fired. I didn't think Dad would actually believe it that fast. I asked him if he was going to tell our parents the truth now in front of me. He said he needed time. He said, can we talk about the kidney first? Please, Danny, I'm still your brother. That's the sentence that ended it for me. I walked out of that hospital room and called my parents that same night. I told them everything, and I sent them copies of everything. The badge logs, Claire's statement, the archived server data. I gave them 48 hours to hear it directly from Ryan before I took it further, because some old part of me still wanted to give my family the chance to handle this like a family. My mother called Ryan. He denied it again, even with the paperwork sitting in her inbox. That was the last straw for her. Oddly enough, not the theft, not the 6 years of my life it cost me, but him lying to her face one more time while dying in a hospital bed. She drove to the hospital and, according to Amanda, screamed at him until hospital staff asked her to step outside. Once the family truth was out, I made a decision I know some people will judge me for. I forwarded the badge logs and Claire's statement to my old CFO, who still worked at Whitcomb Freight, and to the company's outside counsel. Since the original misconduct, termination was still sitting in my permanent professional record. 2 weeks later, the company reopened the case internally, and given the statute of limitations on the underlying fraud, the state's Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division opened a formal investigation. My name was formally cleared in a written company statement. Ryan was charged with wire fraud and falsification of business records. He's currently facing restitution demands and a likely multi-year sentence, on top of still needing a kidney he now, understandably, cannot get from anyone in our family who's willing to sit in a room with him. Somewhere in the middle of all this legal chaos, Claire asked me, gently, apologetically, whether I'd still consider being tested as a donor, separate from everything else. Because Ryan genuinely might die without one. I sat with that question for 4 days. Here's where I landed, and I'm not going to pretend it's a clean, movie ending kind of answer. I said no, not out of revenge. I told Claire, and I told my parents, that 6 years ago Ryan made a calculated decision to sacrifice my entire life to protect his own comfort, and he did it without hesitation. Without a single phone call, without one moment of the family loyalty, he was suddenly invoking on his deathbed. I'm not required to give a piece of my body to the person who took a piece of my life and never once tried to give it back until his own life was on the line. I told them I hope he survives. I meant that I don't wish him dead, but hoping someone lives and volunteering my own kidney are two very different things, and I'm allowed to hold that line. 3 months later, a few things have shifted since I first wrote this down. Ryan was formally indicted last month on 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of falsifying business records. His plea deal negotiations are ongoing, but restitution alone will likely cost him and Claire their house. He remains on the kidney transplant wait list. Last I heard through Amanda, he's had 2 potential matches fall through for unrelated medical reasons, and he's back to searching the general donor registry like anyone else would have to. My mother has apologized to me 3 times now in 3 different ways, and I believe at least 2 of them were genuine. We're rebuilding something slowly on my terms this time. My father still hasn't said the words "I'm sorry," But he did call me last week just to ask how my business was doing, which for him might be as close as it gets. Claire and I still talk sometimes. She's in therapy. She told me she wishes she'd said something 6 years ago instead of choosing not to think about it. And I told her I understand why she didn't. And that I don't hold it against her the way I hold it against him. As for me, my accounting practice in Austin just hit 40 clients this year. I got engaged in the spring to someone who knew every detail of this story before she ever met a single member of my family, and chose to stay anyway. I used to think the worst thing my brother ever did to me was the frame job. I don't think that anymore. The worst thing he did was assume that after everything, I'd still hand over a piece of myself the second he needed one. I didn't.